How to scoop impossibles. So we all know that an impossible is when you pop the board up and it wraps around your back foot, sort of doing an off-axis rotation. But the key is that the grip tape side of your board stays in contact with your back foot the entire time. Well, it seems like a lot of people struggle to do this trick correctly or even at all.
Guys, I have a confession. I can't do impossibles.
And there's actually a good number of people who end up just doing regular 360 shove-its and calling it an impossible. So much so that some people don't understand the difference between the two tricks. Well, I'm going to try to clear that up just a bit in this video by showing you the proper way to get the board to wrap around your back foot, and by trying to show you how to avoid accidentally doing 360 shove-its. So first off, I should mention I do have a straight up how-to impossible video. It's from a few years ago, but I think that the main points of it still hold up. So you may want to check that out first and then come back to this one. So what we're really going to be focusing on in this video is how to use your back foot in the right way in order to keep the board stuck to it. So first, let's talk about the foot placement for your back foot. Where I like to have mine is nice and snug in the toe side pocket. You'll probably want to hang your toes off just a bit so you'll have some leverage to scoop under the board. And you're pretty much going to be putting a lot of your weight into the ball of your foot, which is in that pocket. Also, make sure that your foot isn't too far back onto the edge of the tail. You want it to be a bit more down on your deck towards the bolts. And lastly, you can kind of experiment with how much or how little you hang your toes off. But just know that if you keep your foot without your toes hanging off at all and it's more towards the middle of the tail, this is one of the main things that causes the board to fly off your back foot and do more of a 360 shove-it. So the first main thing to really learn and focus on is that your back foot is sort of doing this sweeping motion where it scoops under the tail and also is pushing forward in order to get the board to flip over backwards. What you don't want to do is snap down on the tail like you would for other flip tricks, because this is going to cause the board to fly up and away from your back foot. So in order to get the proper scoop, you need to understand that you're not only pressing down, but you're using your toes to dig into the board so that it sort of starts to turn over onto your foot, and then you can start to sweep it forward. And if you know how to do pressure flips, the setup for it is actually really similar. So the next part, which can feel a little weird, is actually what you start to do with your back foot once you've jumped. As the nose of the board starts to come up, you need to make sure you're in control of the board by pushing your back foot forward against the grip tape and sort of turning your foot and lower leg sideways in order to follow the board. And actually, now that I say it, I think that the concept of your back foot following the board isn't really a good one to have in your mind. I think that's one of the reasons people have trouble with this trick. They just try and pop a 360 shove-it and then follow the board around in a circle with their back foot. But really, it's the other way around. It's your back foot scooping through the entire time that's giving the board the momentum to flip over, rather than you just giving it that full 360 pop right from the beginning. So anyway, as for actual practice steps, I would say the first one would be just to use your back foot and practice popping the board back over onto its grip tape and landing on top of your back foot. If you can do this a few times and the board isn't flying away from your foot, then you're off to a good start. So obviously the goal here is to get the board to come all the way around. And so this is where you can start to experiment with how much of your toes you hang off the board. And just remember that your foot is probably too far onto the tail if the board is just flying away from you. So you can start practicing getting the full rotation while just standing still and landing with one foot. And by this point, it should start to feel pretty natural, but you'll notice what your foot is doing in the air. Pretty much as soon as you're jumping off the ground, your front foot starts to scoop forward. And as the board starts to flip over backwards, you start lifting your leg almost straight up. And as the board continues to rotate, you just sort of pull your foot back to where it started off and then press down to land. And if you look at one in slow motion, it's actually very minimal movement with my back foot. And that's because if you really lock your back foot into that pocket right off the bat, it really doesn't take too much to get the board to flip. So if you're at this point, I'd say it's safe to start trying this while rolling and just landing with one foot. And just remember that the key here is focusing completely on that back foot and getting the wrap correctly. So don't worry about too much else at this point. And keep in mind, you're not snapping the tail down like you would when you're doing an Ollie or other tricks. Make sure your toes are hanging off just the right amount. And make sure you're digging in and scooping forward with your back foot. And now finally, I'd say it's time to start trying it all together and landing it. And hopefully, if you keep these tips in mind, you'll be able to get your impossibles a bit more wrapped and a little less 360 shove-ity. So here are a few of my impossibles. I can already see the comments saying that I don't wrap it vertically enough. But in my opinion, as long as the board isn't completely parallel to the ground and flat when it's spinning, and as long as your back foot is in contact with the grip tape pretty much the entire time pushing the board around, then you have yourself an impossible. So as always, I'd like to thank those who support me on Patreon. You guys are consistently awesome. And besides that, I'd like to thank you for watching, and you can like and subscribe if you want.